The whole time I was painting, I couldn't stop thinking about how completely backward the entire situation had become. There I was, standing in the hot sun, rolling coat after coat of bland beige paint onto my shed, because apparently brown wasn't earth-toned enough for the Serene Meadows Homeowners Association. Beige. The color of surrender. The color of giving up. Of rolling over and letting entitled people win. I'd worked so hard to build something of my own out here, something peaceful and honest, and now I was repainting a perfectly fine shed just to satisfy the absurd aesthetic standards of a group I didn't even realize had authority over my land. And let's be honest, this wasn't about the paint. Not really. It was about power. Camille couldn't stand the fact that I had dared to challenge her, first by asking her not to drive across my land like it was a shortcut to the country club, and then by posting big, clear no trespassing signs like any rational property owner would. So, she retaliated. Not with a conversation, not even with a neighborly complaint, but with the kind of passive-aggressive legal jab that only someone with too much time, too much money, and too much influence would think to use. And she'd done it through the HOA, like it was her personal army. That's what made my blood boil the most, how calculated it all felt. Camille was playing chess, not checkers, and she'd made it clear I was just another piece she was trying to knock off the board. Every stroke of that beige roller was a reminder that Camille had taken this conflict to a whole new level. What started as tire tracks in the grass had turned into a campaign of intimidation, trespassing, destruction, manipulation, and now, bureaucratic warfare. She wasn't just ignoring my rights as a landowner anymore. She was actively trying to erase them, to make it look like I was the one in the wrong, the one disrupting her idea of how things should be. And let me tell you, nothing makes a person feel smaller than realizing someone else is pulling strings behind the scenes to make your life harder, just because you wouldn't roll over and let them have their way. I kept thinking about that ridiculous letter as I painted. Violation, shed paint not in accordance with Serene Meadows color code. It sounded so official, so serious, like I'd committed some kind of moral crime against the peaceful aesthetic of a neighborhood I barely interacted with. It didn't mention the Lambo. It didn't mention the destroyed grass or the stolen signs. It didn't care that someone had been trespassing on my land every day like it was a private driveway. No, that didn't violate anything, apparently. But a shed that was a few shades too dark? That was unacceptable. I felt helpless, boxed in. Camille had found the perfect weapon, rules. And the worst part? She was probably sitting behind that ridiculous hedge, sipping from a glass of something expensive, laughing about how easy it had been to put me in my place. Counting her Botox money while I scrubbed and painted, trying to stay in line, trying not to draw more fire. It was like being stuck in a game where every move I made, she was already 5 steps ahead. And it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about dignity. I thought moving to the countryside would bring me peace. I thought it would bring me quiet. But instead, I found myself stuck in a battle I never wanted, painting over the only space in the world that was supposed to be mine, trying to avoid more letters, more violations, more smug looks from Camille as she and her sister tore up my field like it was part of their weekend routine. And I still didn't have cameras. Still didn't have proof. All I had were deepening ruts in my grass and a growing sense of being completely, utterly outmatched. And yet, even as I painted, I knew I wasn't done fighting. Maybe that beige paint was meant to be a symbol of submission, of bending the knee to the HOA queen across the field, but to me, it became something else. A marker. A turning point. Camille wanted to play dirty? Fine. But I had plans too. I didn't work for 20 years, scraping by in the city, just to give up now. This land meant something to me. This farm, these herbs, that stretch of green grass, they weren't just a hobby. They were my dream. My future. And I wasn't going to let anyone drive over that without a fight. So I painted. And I plotted. Because if Camille wanted to play games, she was about to find out I wasn't the pushover she thought I was. I came home from the farmer's market that Thursday afternoon feeling strangely energized. I just had my best day yet, sold out of basil by noon, made a few new contacts for weekend deliveries, and even scored a compliment on my lavender sachets from a retired chef who promised to send his friends my way. It felt like maybe, just maybe, things were finally beginning to shift in my favor. The footage I'd gathered over the past week was still burning a hole in my hard drive, solid, irrefutable proof that Camille wasn't just an obnoxious neighbor. She was a fraud, a criminal, and a hypocrite operating an illegal high-end Botox and beauty clinic right in her backyard. And the fact that every single one of her clients had to sneak through my property like they were part of some covert operation only made her arrogance sting that much more. I was preparing to make my next move, maybe talk to a lawyer, maybe bring it to the HOA board, somewhere. I hadn't quite decided yet, but I was ready. That optimism lasted exactly 6 seconds. Because when I got to my mailbox, I noticed an envelope that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't the standard HOA envelope like the one they'd used for the paint violation. This one was heavier, thicker, and ominously stamped with bold red lettering across the front, "Urgent Legal Notice." That phrase alone was enough to freeze me mid-step. I felt my stomach drop as I pulled it out, the paper stiff like cardstock, the kind of material that just screamed expensive lawyers and bad news. My name was printed on the front in all caps, formal and cold. It didn't feel like a letter from a neighbor. It felt like a warning shot. I didn't even make it into the house. I ripped the envelope open right there in the driveway, dirt still on my boots and herb crates in the backseat. Inside was a 6-page letter printed in small, precise font, definitely drafted by a professional legal team. As I skimmed the first few lines, the sense of dread settled in like concrete. This wasn't just another petty violation about earth-toned paint. No, Camille had gone full scorched earth. The letter was a cease and desist. According to the document, I was being accused of engaging in unauthorized surveillance, violating the privacy of neighboring residents, and, get this, creating a hostile living environment through digital harassment and intimidation. My jaw literally dropped as I read the words. Camille, the woman who had trespassed across my property daily, destroyed my land, stolen my signs, and set up an illegal spa operation in her backyard, was accusing me of harassment? It was almost comical in its audacity, except nothing about it felt funny. There were formal citations of HOA bylaws, claims of emotional distress, and a threat of escalating the issue to civil court if I didn't immediately remove all surveillance equipment and cease communication or obstruction of traffic on community-accessed pathways. Camille had turned the truth on its head and weaponized it against me. She was painting herself as the victim and casting me as some kind of unhinged rural vigilante with spy gear and a grudge. The very woman who had built a spa fortress behind a hedge and ferried in local elites under cover of secrecy now had the gall to call me dangerous? I stood there, letter in hand, pulse pounding in my ears. The audacity was nuclear. But buried beneath the outrage was something worse, doubt. Because for the first time since I'd started uncovering her secret, I realized just how powerful Camille really was. She wasn't just some rich narcissist with Botox syringes and bad boundaries. She had resources, connections, and clearly, access to legal firepower. This cease and desist wasn't about protecting privacy. It was a chess move. She knew I was close to exposing her. And this was her attempt to scare me off the board before I could make my next move. I walked inside, dropped the letter on the table, and sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing. What now? If I ignored the letter, there was a real risk she'd escalate things further, possibly drag me into court, smear my name, tie me up in a legal nightmare I couldn't afford. But if I caved, if I took down my cameras and backed off, she'd win. She'd keep using my property. She'd keep running her illegal business. And worst of all, she'd keep treating me like I didn't matter. But I did matter. This farm mattered. The land I worked for, the dream I built, it all mattered. I reread the letter, this time slower. Camille had been careful, but not perfect. Nowhere in the document did she deny the existence of the business. Nowhere did she say I was wrong about what I saw. It was all about how I saw it. That was important. It meant she was trying to shut me down on technicalities, not truth. And that gave me an opening. I realized then that this wasn't just a threat, it was a sign that she was scared. Scared of what I knew. Scared of what I could prove. Scared enough to try and silence me with legal jargon and intimidation. So I didn't take down the cameras. Instead, I called a lawyer. Because Camille had finally crossed the line. And I wasn't backing down. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I wasn't new to stress, I'd handled deadlines, money trouble, even a few medical scares in my life, but this was different. This wasn't just pressure. It was targeted, calculated intimidation. Inside was a dense legal document, filled with tightly packed paragraphs of threatening language. They accused me of violating privacy laws, of recording people without consent, even though the cameras were clearly on my own property. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding, but then I saw the signatures. It wasn't just Camille as HOA president, it was a law office downtown. She had actually retained real legal counsel. This wasn't HOA bureaucracy anymore. Camille was upping the ante, making it perfectly clear, back down now, or face a lawsuit you'll never financially survive. And I'll admit it, I was terrified. I'd never dealt with lawyers before, not for anything beyond lease paperwork. Now I was facing the possibility of civil court, massive fines, and legal fees that could bleed me dry. My farm, my savings, my dream, everything I had worked toward for decades, was suddenly on the line. And for what? For putting cameras up on my own property to stop a trespasser? It felt like the world had flipped upside down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, mind racing. I kept picturing worst-case scenarios, a judge siding with Camille, the farm being seized to cover costs, bankruptcy. It sounds dramatic now, but in that moment, it all felt painfully possible. She had money. She had lawyers. She had influence. I was just one guy with a camera and a patch of dirt. By morning, the fear had fully set in. I found myself actually reaching for the camera equipment, debating whether to take it all down, maybe even delete the footage. What if she was right? What if I'd crossed some invisible legal line I didn't even know about? But before I could make that mistake, I noticed something strange near my gate. Wedged into the small crack between the post and the fence was a single, carefully folded piece of paper. It was small. Simple. The kind of thing someone could slip into place without being noticed. The handwriting was clearly feminine, neat, but rushed. Like someone had written it quickly, watching over their shoulder the whole time. And the message? Just 5 words. Keep recording. You're not wrong. That was it. No name. No return address. No explanation. Just 5 words that hit me harder than any lawsuit ever could. My heart skipped a beat. Someone knew. Someone else out there understood what I was going through, and more than that, they were on my side. The moment was surreal. I stood there in the driveway, note in hand, staring at those words like they were sacred text. And I knew, deep in my gut, this wasn't a trap. This wasn't Camille playing games. This was someone trying to help. But how did they know about the legal threats? The cease and desist had only arrived the day before. This person was close to the situation. Too close. And in that instant, a possibility hit me like a spark. Martha. It made too much sense. Camille's sister, always quiet, always watching. The one who never looked me in the eye, who walked with her head down like the weight of something enormous was crushing her. I'd noticed the sadness in her eyes, the way she never seemed comfortable in her own skin around Camille. She wasn't just a bystander, she was stuck in something she hated. From that moment on, I saw everything differently. The battle wasn't just mine. I had an ally. Someone was risking themselves to help me. And whether or not it was Martha, that note gave me exactly what I needed, hope. That entire day, I wrestled with the decision. Should I keep the cameras up, knowing the risk? Could I afford to challenge Camille and her legal team? But with every hour that passed, my courage started to rebuild. I wasn't some fragile farmer who'd run at the first sign of a legal letter. I was a man with evidence, hard, visual proof of illegal activity taking place just yards from my home. Camille could throw lawyer letters all she wanted, but she was the one committing crimes, not me. That evening, I made my choice. I sat down, reviewed all my footage again, and began organizing everything. I catalogued every trespass, timestamped every luxury car, clipped every moment where that hedge concealed clients coming and going like shadows in the night. And then I backed everything up to multiple drives. If she wanted to start a legal war, I'd bring the truth to court with me. But I also knew I had to get smart. This wasn't just about gathering dirt. It was about building a case. I started reading everything I could find, state statutes, HOA bylaws, zoning ordinances. I printed articles, downloaded PDFs, annotated laws with highlighters like a college student cramming for finals. It was tedious. It was exhausting. But it was empowering. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Camille had overstepped in every possible way. And the best part? My cameras were perfectly legal. I had every right to record what happened on my own land. Her threats were nothing more than a scare tactic, and that note, those 5 handwritten words, were the lifeline I didn't know I needed. Because now, I wasn't just protecting my farm. I was getting ready to expose everything. And somewhere out there, someone believed in me. Someone brave enough to take a risk. Someone who knew the truth, and who was willing to help me bring it into the light. A real smile, not the polite kind, not the fearful, don't make anyone mad kind, but a full, free, triumphant smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. And me? I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt like someone who had finally stopped tiptoeing around injustice and taken a stand. Camille shouted, demanding help, threatening lawsuits, accusing me of sabotage. But the spike strips were legal. The signs were posted. The footage was being recorded. The witnesses were neutral. And I had receipts. Martha had given me more than just names and phone numbers. She had quietly forwarded emails, invoices, hidden recordings. Everything was copied, labeled, and time-stamped. Enough to not only shut down Camille's operation, but to implicate her in fraud, tax evasion, and likely unlicensed medical activity. The HOA board members didn't leave. In fact, one of them called the county zoning office right there, citing a suspected violation of residential use codes. The other one kept filming and casually mentioned, "Looks like that emergency meeting about your leadership just found its agenda." Camille's voice cracked when she tried to regain control, but no one was listening to her anymore. The spell had broken. By sundown, Camille's precious business was effectively in ruins. Her most valuable client was seen and humiliated, likely on her way to a major scandal. The HOA board was already drafting a vote to remove Camille from her position, and a neighbor had called the sheriff's office after hearing yelling and possible unlicensed medical activity. And Martha? She didn't run. She didn't cry. She came out of the house, walked over to the chaos, and for the first time in years, looked Camille in the eyes without flinching. "I'm done," she said simply. "You don't own me anymore." Then she turned, walked up my driveway, and stood beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Justice had spoken loud enough for everyone. And that, folks, is how two Karen sisters went from stomping across my land like they owned it, to losing everything they'd built, one spike strip, one security camera, and one fearless neighbor at a time. What started as a battle over property lines turned into a full-on reckoning, and in the end, poetic justice bloomed right alongside the sunflowers. Camille's empire, built on intimidation, manipulation, and unchecked authority, collapsed in real time, and the best part? It was all completely legal. No shouting matches. No shady tactics. Just carefully gathered evidence, documented violations, and a whole lot of patience. Her white SUV, once a symbol of dominance, sat deflated and useless at the edge of my now thriving field, right where her tires had torn up my soil for the last time. And Martha? That woman's transformation was something to behold. From trembling behind Camille's shadow to standing tall in front of a crowd and declaring her independence with a piece of paper that once symbolized everything she'd been afraid of. She didn't just walk away from that moment, she claimed it. Took it back. She went from living under her sister's thumb to becoming a powerful advocate for fair housing and neighborly respect. Today, she runs her own HOA consulting business, using the nightmare she endured to make sure no one else has to go through what she did. The golden retriever that once mirrored her fear is now a happy, tail-wagging mascot of the neighborhood. He runs freely along the edges of my field, no longer flinching at car doors or raised voices. Like Martha, he's finally allowed to just be. 3 months after the fallout, I stood at the edge of my field, watching rows upon rows of sunflowers sway in the breeze. The same land Camille once treated like a shortcut was now a glowing sea of gold, thriving and defiant. I even put up a new sign. Private property, sunflowers only. No more trespassing. No more white SUVs cutting ruts through the soil. Just beauty, peace, and the unmistakable satisfaction of justice served cold, and rooted deep. People started stopping by just to see the flowers. They became something of a local landmark. Kids took pictures. Neighbors brought visitors. More than one person told me they saw those sunflowers as a symbol that bullies don't always win, that sometimes the quiet one, the one they overlook, is the one who's quietly laying the foundation for their downfall. And the farmer's market? Let's just say my little herb stand went from modest side hustle to a full-blown weekend favorite. My lavender sells out before noon. The basil? People line up for it. But more than sales, it's the peace I've found that matters most. No more watching my back. No more passive-aggressive letters about mailbox colors. No more HOA threats disguised as friendly reminders. The neighborhood itself changed too. With Camille gone and a new, democratically elected board in place, people actually started enjoying where they lived again. That meeting where she was voted out? It ended with applause. Real, cathartic, joyful applause. And afterward, neighbors lingered, not to complain, but to connect. Stories came out. Wounds were acknowledged. Healing began. For the first time in years, this place felt like a community instead of a kingdom with one petty tyrant at the top. And now? The new HOA board even issued a formal apology for the way I'd been treated and committed in writing to transparency, fairness, and neighbor-first governance. That document might not seem like much, But to me, it represented a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who had quietly suffered under Camille's reign. The best revenge wasn't just the spike strips. It wasn't even the public humiliation or the avalanche of legal trouble. No, the best revenge was freedom. Freedom to walk across my own land without fear. Freedom to grow what I want, live how I want, and sleep at night knowing that the people in charge are finally accountable. Justice doesn't always come in grand, dramatic explosions. Sometimes, it blooms slowly, like sunflowers, rising higher every day until it towers over the past. And in this case, the view is beautiful. So, if you've ever had to deal with neighbors who think they own your land, or HOAs that treat your front porch like enemy territory, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and who knows? Your experience might just become the next feature here on QA Stories. Because let's be honest, we've all known a Camille. And nothing feels better than watching a bully trip over their own arrogance, especially when the fall is caught on camera. Hit that subscribe button if this kind of slow burn, high satisfaction justice hits the spot. There's more drama, more consequences, and more unbelievable true stories coming your way. This has been QA Stories, where karma might take the scenic route, but she always arrives. See you in the next story. The end.